All right, everyone. Jeff Potts here, and you have joined us for another edition of Tech Talk Live. I sometimes say what number we're on, and I have no idea at this point. We've done so many of these. So today we are joined by Peter Monks, who is in charge of funny haircuts at Alfresco, and also, when he gets time, he is the product manager for the ecosystem. And we also have Greg Milan, who works with Peter on the ecosystem. And we are going to be talking about the API. Before we do that, I should mention that this session is being recorded as usual. And within a day or two, we will post the recording and the slides as well for our friends who couldn't join us live. Now, we're also planning on ditching WebEx. So this may be the last Tech Talk Live on WebEx, and we are going to move to a Google Hangouts format for the next one. So, you know, hopefully that is a good change for most of you. If you have feedback on that, I'd definitely like to hear it. So I guess without further ado, we should get going here. So Peter, Greg, are you guys ready to kick us off?
All set. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff.
All right, go for it. I'll wait until the most awkward moment possible, and then I'll interject questions. If that's okay.
Sounds good. I will expect nothing less.
Very good.
So welcome, everybody. I think this is actually number 64, so I'm very happy. The kind of geek in me is happy that we've got a nice power of 2 number there. Was it 2 to the 7, 2 to the 6, somewhere around there? But yes, this is number 64. Exactly. And we're going to be talking today about the Alfresco Public API. So we're giving an update on the API that we launched at Java 1 last year, and it's been in production in the cloud since then. Update on some of the new work that we're doing around the API, and then Greg is also going to give us a demo. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Can you can I get a confirmation that you're seeing the screen okay?
Looks good.
Okay, great. So, yeah, as I mentioned, we'll give an overview, and I'm going to try to whip through that fairly quickly. There's a lot of slides in this, but we really want to focus on the demo and on questions if we can. So we're going to start with just an overview. For those of you who aren't familiar with the API, who haven't played with the API yet in the cloud, I'll give an overview of basically what it's about, some of the patterns that we're using now for API development, and those are being fairly rigorously adhered to throughout the API set, and that will continue into the future APIs that appear. We'll then go into, or Greg's going to give an overview of what's new and what's coming in the next release to cloud, which is going out in the next week or 2. He'll then demo the API and show a couple of different variations of it in action. I'll then jump back in and go through the roadmap, and we'll finish with some questions and answers. So let's get moving. So those of you who've looked at the developer portal, which was also part of the launch, excuse me, at Java 1 last year, will have probably seen this diagram. This is really our overview of what the Alfresco API, the Alfresco Public API is about. It's basically an out-of-process API. So this is not an extension to our Java Foundation services or the JavaScript or FreeMarker scripting APIs. This is an out-of-process API, and that's obviously of relevance to the cloud in particular. The cloud it's not possible for third-party developers to inject their own logic, their own Java code or JavaScript or FreeMarker into the Alfresco cloud, and therefore we need to come up with a more robust and comprehensive API set that could be accessed in the cloud. And what we looked at when we looked at the Alfresco Enterprise product, we realized we already had a lot of this with CMIS. And really all we needed to do was add some capabilities that are specific to Alfresco that CMIS doesn't cover. So if we break that out, the API is made up of, as I mentioned, CMIS, which is really around kind of traditional document and folder CRUD operations, folder file, content, metadata manipulation, and then search and query. and a set of JSON-based REST APIs. And these are things that add in Alfresco proprietary concepts, things like networks, sites, people, comments, tags, activities, and the list goes on. And that REST API is really where we've been investing most of our effort. CMIS is a fairly stable standard at this point. There is a new version coming out shortly, but for now the 1.0 has been stable for quite some time. Our implementation has been stable for quite some time. So we've been focusing on the REST side and really trying to come up with a set of principles and then APIs that adhere to those principles that give us our best ability to expose those Alfresco concepts. The other thing we added in front of all of this, and again, this is really just a refresher, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, is a more cloud-ready security mechanism or in particular authentication mechanism. And for that, we chose OAuth 2. So unlike the enterprise product where you can use things like HTTP basic auth, or if you've configured an SSO solution, you can use SSO cookies or NTLM, that kind of thing, to access Alfresco web scripts and Alfresco REST APIs. With the cloud or with these public APIs, authentication is handled exclusively using OAuth 2. And that means that in order to do it, in order to access the APIs, you will need to register as a developer, sign up for application, with an application, get some keys, and then use those keys in your application. There's a couple of reasons we chose OAuth 2, but again, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I actually covered a lot of this in my DevCon talk last year. So there is a DevCon talk I gave in both Berlin and San Jose where I covered some of the details of OAuth. And finally, I guess the only other thing to note from this diagram is that we are targeting mobile apps, web apps, and desktop apps. And we do have examples of the first two. So there are apps out there, mobile apps and web apps, that use the Alfresco APIs already in cloud. I'm not aware of any desktop apps, but there may be some. And Jeff, I don't know if you know of any, but it's actually something I've been wanting to play with just to really prove that it is easy to do.
No, I don't know of any off the top of my head.
Yeah, fat clients are not that popular these days. So looking at how these REST APIs are structured, and I'm primarily going to be focusing on REST. I'll assume that most of you are familiar with CMIS or at least know where to go to get more information about it. So the REST APIs is really where the focus of today's talk will be. Basically, we've come up with a way of structuring both URLs and JSON objects that is standard or will be standard across all of the APIs. Unlike, say, the Slingshot APIs, those of you who've used the Slingshot APIs will know that there's a lot of variability in both URL structure and in the request and response objects. And that's a pain because it means you can't apply what you've learned for one API to another API, or at least you can't assume that the two will be the same. So one of the things I'm very focused on with the new API set is consistency, having consistent global rules that always apply. And the first place you run into this, of course, is how the URLs are structured. So you can see here that we have at least for cloud, we have an endpoint or a host called api.alfresco.com. The APIs within that are structured into tenants. So if there's if you're signed up to your own network and perhaps one or two others, you can access those tenants using the tenant's ID, the domain of the tenant. And that's the primary structuring mechanism. Within that, there are a number of API scopes. And right now, these scopes are limited to just APIs, but in the future, we may offer things like beta APIs. We may even have some extension APIs, so that if you've developed an API that you want to expose out through the Alfresco Cloud API, you can do that, and we will scope it appropriately so that client apps are clear that this is not an Alfresco supported API. There's an API name, and these are different functional groupings. So Alfresco's core functionality falls under an API name of Alfresco. CMIS falls under an API name of CMIS. Workflow, when and if a workflow API comes out, would probably be under an API name of workflow, perhaps activity, it depends. That's really TBD at this point. But the idea here is that there are some broad, fairly coarse-grained groupings of APIs, and we want to group those together and make those explicit. And you'll see why when we look at the next path element. The next path element is version. So we do allow or support the notion of multiple concurrent versions of an API within a single Alfresco instance. And this is really important for backwards compatibility. If we need to break backwards compatibility, that is the point at which we need to roll a new version, and the previous version or versions will remain in place unchanged. And that means that your client apps can always connect to an Alfresco server, and provided they see a version that they've been developed against, which is version 1, let's say, that version will operate and will use the same structures and URLs and so forth that it did at the time it was developed. And that's very important. And the reason that we nest versions within an API name is that different API names get versioned at different rates. So CMIS, for example, 1.0 is out today, and 1.1 is probably going to be ratified in the next 3 to 6 months or so. So we need to be able to version CMIS independently of the Alfresco API, and both of them need to be versioned independently of, say, a workflow API. So that's why we have this concept of API names and versions. It lets us version different functional sets of the API independently. And then finally, within all of that, you actually get to the API itself. Really, all of those things, the tenant, scope, name, and version, are all just mechanisms to break up the API in manageable chunks. What most of you as potential client developers are interested in, though, are the entity types that a particular API supports. And the example shown here is sites. We have an API that lets you list sites and view the data of, which sites the user has access to, the type of site, etc. So that appears right down at the bottom at the end of that, underneath the version. I should also mention that the notion of entity types doesn't apply to CMIS. CMIS is an externally, it's a third-party defined standard, and we obviously have input into that, but we don't control it. It does not follow the same mechanism, although we do use the same general URL pattern. So CMIS does exist under tenant, scope, name, version. However, from there on down, the URLs are completely defined by our CMIS implementation. They don't really bear any relationship to the REST APIs. So this entity type URL, right? We have this URL that ends in /sites. It represents basically a data type. So we're no longer thinking of REST APIs as RPCs or as functions that you can invoke. We're trying very hard to take a more pure REST approach to these APIs, and that means we look at the data, and what we're really trying to expose is a data-centric view of the server, not a function or service or action-centric view. So this collection of sites is best thought of as a bag of sites, as a data blob that contains one or more sites or 0 or more sites. The collection itself may or may not be retrievable. There are some collections that do not want client applications to directly request, either for security reasons or because the set is so large that it's expensive to generate. So there may or may not be a way to retrieve an entire collection. However, you can, of course, retrieve individual instances from the collection. And to do that, you just get the ID. And you can see here we have a site called Mullet Gallery, and that URL path is the same. We have tenant, scope, API name, API version, entity type, in this case sites, and then we append an ID on the end, and that will give us the site information for that particular site. And this rule is global. Again, we're all about consistency here. If you're looking at sites, you're looking at people, you're looking at other types of data that we expose, this general rule, there is a collection of the entity type. To retrieve an instance, you append the ID of the instance you're interested in. That's a global rule. It applies regardless of what those entity types are. You can also, or rather, we can also nest entity types. So there are some cases where there is related data, and here the example I'm using is that a site has members, and members are people. So this Mullet Gallery site may have a member, that is myself. So the idea is that we can nest these connections as deep as we wish in order to expose the data that the server contains in a really accessible way. So you can see here that we have a top-level sites collection. We're narrowing it down to just the mullet gallery site, the site that is identified by mullet gallery. We're looking at the members sub-collection of the site, and then in the second example, down the bottom of the page, we're drilling into just one of those people, and that will retrieve that person object, the person represented by that ID. And as you know, in cloud, user IDs are email addresses, which is why that looks like an email address. Again, this is a general rule. If an API has, or I should say, if an entity type has nested sub-collections, or even doubly, triply, quadruply nested sub-collections, the same basic rule applies. There is always a collection first, and then you can retrieve an individual instance by ID. Some other things about the APIs are creating a new entity instance. If you wish to create a new site, let's say, and right now the API doesn't support creation of sites, although it may in the future, but as an example, the general pattern is that you post to the collection URL. So you post a site object to the site's collection, and that will append or add that site to that collection. To update an individual entity, so an instance of an entity, you would put to the instance URL, so that would be site/mullet gallery. You would execute an HTTP put against that URL, and then of course delete is the same. You would delete site/mullet gallery. Right now sites are read-only, but as I say, the general pattern is that post, put, delete are handled in these ways. And of course, these rules apply regardless of whether it's a top-level collection or a nested collection. If you wish to update a member of a particular site, you can do so using a put against that particular nested sub-collections instance. So it's really, and it's kind of to quote Terry Pratchett, it's turtles all the way down. There's really no limit to the depth we might go to in nesting these sub-collections. And what you as an application developer really just need to remember is it's very consistent. It is always collection instance, sub-collection instance, sub-sub-collection instance, et cetera, and that's just built up using URL path elements. So where are we today? Right now, we only have a single API scope, just the public API scope, and those are public APIs that we support. If you use them and they don't do what it says on the tin, you can call us up and find out what's going on. As I said, we do have plans to, at some point, to offer additional scopes. Right now, we haven't had any need to do so, but as soon as that need arises, those new scopes will appear. We only have two API names at the moment, and that's Alfresco and CMIS, and that really goes back to the earlier diagram that I showed. And those two API types will probably be augmented fairly quickly with some other API types. So we'll get to that in the roadmap at the end. And right now, we only really have 4 top-level entity types. So there's sites, people, tags, and nodes. And part of what Greg is going to talk about is what's coming next. So over time, the approach that we've chosen, the reason that we've ended up with this approach is that one of the nice things is it lets us evolve the APIs without disrupting client applications. Right now, every single time a Slingshot API JSON response changes, a whole bunch of client apps break, and we don't know which ones, we don't know whether there was any breakage. It's somewhat problematic. The new API pattern lets us do change in or affect change in a controlled manner. In particular, when we add new entity types, we can simply add them as new URLs, and existing apps are unaware of those URLs and simply continue, business as normal. We also have consistency rules now, so any new entity type that we add will follow the same rules that we've already established, and that means that if, as an application developer, you see a new API and you drill into it, there's a whole bunch of things you've already learned that will apply to the new API as well. And that means you're not busily, trying to dissect JSON responses, figure out URL structures that are different to anything you've seen before. It's all very consistent, and that helps with, reducing the learning curve from a client application perspective. And then finally, and on top of this, and I expect that this will not be used so much by client apps, but internally this is going to benefit us a lot. All of these APIs, all of these URL structures are self-discoverable. So a client app that knows nothing beyond the root URL, api.alfresco.com, and how to do the OAuth 2 flow, that's sufficient for any client to actually walk the URL structure and figure everything out. So the idea, and this is really where REST starts to really, I guess, hit its stride, is the whole concept of REST is that APIs can be self-discovered. You don't need to bake in any assumptions into your client app. And we're assuming people will do that, and that's fine. We want to support that without breaking client apps when we evolve the API set. But it is good to know that if you wish, you can do API explorers that can walk the Alfresco API set, just report on what they find. That's actually quite useful. I think, and then finally, that also has the nice benefit that instead of relying on Alfresco version numbers extensions, you can now become reliant on API versions. Even as Alfresco releases new versions of Alfresco, the versions of the API that you're using will remain in place based on some, formal EOL end-of-life process and end-of-life guidance. That's an important guarantee for application developers. And with that, I will pass it on to Greg. So Greg, I'm going to transfer control over to you now.
All right, thanks, Peter. Give me a chance here to share my screen.
And you should now have control.
Okay. All right, so just a quick check. Can you see my desktop?
Yep, indeed.
Great. Okay, so I'll begin talking about what's new. Just a bit of an introduction. This is my first tech talk for Alfresco. I joined Alfresco about 4 months ago. I'm the architect for the ecosystem. It's amazing what can get done in 4 months at Alfresco. So I'll be talking about some of the things that are new and some of the things Peter and I have been working on over the last few months. They consist of some OAuth improvements, a new API for favorites, and a new API for site membership. I'm going to talk to these APIs and show you a little bit about the structure of them, and then importantly, I'll go through a demonstration of some of these APIs in action. So the first thing is OAuth key improvements. If you know a little bit about OAuth 2, you realize there's this concept of a refresh token, which is a token that your client can hang on to and use over the course of time to refresh a user session. So it saves the user the burden of having to log in. And one of the pieces of feedback we got from some of our customers is that it would be handy if those tokens last longer. So we have improved that by extending the lifespan now of the refresh token, so that if you go on leave, for example, if you're lucky enough to get 3 weeks off, say, or something like that, and you come back, your client application will still be there, and you won't have to log in. So I put this little thing in. A lot can happen in 28 days. If you ever saw that zombie movie, 28 Days Later. So gives you an idea of what you can do now with refresh tokens. And we have a new API. So one of the things that Peter mentioned, it's really important, is this idea that you could extend the API by adding new entity types over time without breaking clients. It's a nice extensible mechanism, and we've taken advantage of that by introducing another API for favorites. So if you, in terms of spelling, if you wear one of these hats here, you spell it this way, and if you wear a little derby, you may spell it that way. But we spell it without the U. So if you look at the APIs, you'll see favorites spelled this way. It's a new entity type. It's a new collection under person. So if you go to the person ID for someone using our current REST API, you don't see this collection called favorites. But in a few days, hopefully, when we publish this API to the cloud, you'll see this new collection, and you'll be able to work with favorites as well. One of the things you can do is favorite sites, and I'll be demonstrating a little bit of that. You can also favorite folders and files. And we introduced this set of favorites because the mobile clients in particular want to be able to easily designate favorites from the mobile device. So you'll see a little of that in action as well. And we took this as an opportunity to introduce a new parameter. It sounds like a detail, but it's pretty important. There's a where parameter now for filtering favorites, and that's kind of interesting, but for favorites. But what's even more interesting is we'll be extending that parameter in the future to give you query capability on these APIs and let you build interesting SQL-like expressions of what you want to see. So here's the entity type. I won't go into this in too much detail. This is more or less reference information you can look at later, but it has that information in it: target GUID, which is the thing you favorited, when it was created, and what is actually being favorited, the target in this case, like a site. So building on the patterns that Peter described, we've added favorite APIs that look like this. So if I do an HTTP GET of a person's favorites by just looking at the favorites collection, I get back all the sites, folders, and files that person might have favorited. I can get an individual favorite. So if I'm wanting to look at some details about an individual favorite, like a site or a folder, I can do that too. I could add a favorite by just posting to the favorites collection a new favorite by ID. And if I wanted to forget about something being a favorite, I could just delete it. You might wonder why, one thing on the bottom, why we don't have put in here. Well, there's really no client settable properties that you would modify here, so we didn't need to have put. But again, this is an illustration of all the things you can get done with just a few HTTP verbs: get, put, post, and delete. In this case, just get, post, and delete, provide everything you need. So here's an example. I could do a request to get Fred Blogs favorites, and I see a list of favorites that comes back. Again, I won't go into too much detail here, but this is just another instance where we've taken this general concept we have in Alfresco called a list, and we now have a list of favorites you can get. So you see what the structure looks like in JSON. If I want to look at an individual favorite, if I know the GUID of that favorite, because maybe I've looked at it before in some other context, I could just get information about that. And notice a little detail here. Another one of these extensions that we've added to the APIs is we now return role. And the reason we do that is looking at our mobile clients. Bandwidth and request numbers are at a premium in a mobile client. So we want to make sure we give as much information as we can back to the mobile device in particular. And one of the things they thought was interesting was role. So we added that. We don't break clients that might have been using site entities that they were using in the past, because we've added a property, not removed one. So we'll always be adding properties and not removing them as a way of extending the APIs over time. If I want to add a favorite, following the RESTful pattern of posting to a collection, I just do a post, and it's as simple as this. I just post that structure, and when I'm done, I get back a happy 201 created, and I see the structure of the site information that I've just favorited, and I could save that away and do what I need to do with that. If I want to remove a favorite, that's just an HTTP delete, and I get a friendly 204 no content. No need to tell me any more than the fact that it worked when I do a delete. As I mentioned, we have this where parameter, and the where parameter we're using in a limited sense in this first instance, where we're just using it to return back a list of kinds of things you favorited, folders or files or sites. But we've built it in a way using a SQL-like predicate called exists that we could extend it to do other things in the future, and we will. So, and we've also adopted JSON pointer syntax to designate the things that you're trying to use in the expression, in the predicate. We've done that because it's a convenient standard. We always want to use a standard where we can and not have to invent something new. So it's a pretty simple standard. You just provide the scope of what you're favoriting, and there it is. The next API is site membership request. So we've got this ability to designate favorites. We also wanted the ability to be able to have a client request membership in a site as needed. And again, building on the same collection, the same person structure. You see here the person ID. If you know the person ID, you can create a request by simply adding a site request to that collection, site membership requests. The rules are that if you request to join a moderated site, then you go into the exact same workflow approval you go through with the rest of Alfresco. So no difference. So if I request to join a site, the site manager will see a task in his or her view and will approve or deny my request, just like normal. If I want to join a public site, if I want to request to join a public site, those are implicitly granted. So imagine there's an invisible hand just approving all those requests, by default, and that's what happens when you join a public site. And importantly, if you try to join a private site, if you are sort of probing for interesting private site names, we'll just pretend we don't know anything about that and answer back a 404. So if you try to join the secret site, even if you knew its ID somehow, we're not going to tell you can't join it because that would tell you a little bit about the structure. Instead, we just play dumb on that one and just give you back a 404. So that's another principle we have is where we don't need to tell you something, we don't tell you something. We protect our tenants that way. And currently, you can only request to join a site in your own network. Again, one of these protection things. We didn't want to have a situation where someone in tenant A can request to join a site in tenant B, and if it's public, they're automatically granted membership, things like that. We wanted to be a little more cautious about that. So here's a bit about the type, the structure.
Actually, Greg, I'm sorry to jump in, but could I just make the observation? It's easy, and initially we had gone through this as well, to think that site membership is an RPC, but it's a function, it's an action, it's a verb. I am requesting that the server add this user to the site, but if you look at that URL structure that was on the previous slide, what you'll see is that we've actually looked at it as a data element. It is really a set of site membership request objects, and by doing that, we get all of the goodness that I described earlier. We get put, post, delete semantics. We get the ability to query which site membership requests are currently in queue if it's for a moderated site, et cetera, et cetera. And this, again, is another general pattern we're following is, and this isn't anything we've invented, this is really the REST view of the world, and that is that everything is basically data and collections of data. There is no such thing as RPCs. So I like this API because initially we had thought, oh, well, we're going to have to do an RPC for this. But then when we sat down and looked at it, we realized, no, site membership requests are really a collection of entity types, just like anything else. So, sorry, Greg, I didn't mean to interrupt. But
that's a good point. So we're going to stick to the model where we treat things in a RESTful way as much as possible, and you'll see us doing more of that in the future. Where we're using properties on objects to actually model the things like site membership requests or other kinds of workflow-like activities. So I won't go into a lot of detail about the entity types. Again, this is reference information. Familiarly, you see get, post, put, and delete. So getting a list of member requests is just getting a collection. Posting a new one is the way you join a site. So I could just post to that collection and it gets put on a queue somewhere for someone to approve, or if it's public, automatically approved. I could put a change of request. We're adding a property you'll see in a minute to allow me to explain a little bit more about why I'm asking for membership. And if I just want to say, forget about it, I don't want to really join a site, I can withdraw a request. So here's an example. I could do a get of Fred Blog's site membership requests, and I get back a list of all of the current membership requests that haven't been acted on yet. So these are all sitting in somebody's queue and share. So he's got one here called the secret site. He wants to join the secret site. He's explained why he needs that. So if I want to request a site, if I want to request to join a site, very simple. I just take the ID of the site. I could optionally add a message explaining myself. In this case, I'm working on the secret project, so please let me in. And I get back a good 201 response, and that says that, not that you're in the site, it simply says that the site membership request has been granted. If it was a moderated site like this one, it's waiting for some human being to approve it, or it could be a process in the future. If I want to change my explanation, so let's say I haven't heard anything about my membership request, and now I want to emphasize I need access. I could explain myself further. I really need access in this case. And I get back, that's good. Duly noted, you'll get someone to look at that in a minute. Deleting a membership request is pretty easy. Just delete the request, and that just as if it never happened, it gets removed from someone's task list. And that's it for reference material. So you go back and look at that in more detail, and in a few days, you'll be able to try it out yourself on the public cloud. But I wanted to jump into a demonstration of some of these APIs in action because we don't do this for academic reasons. We're doing it because we have real applications that need this function. So let me get out of here and jump into demo mode. So hopefully you can see my my screen. Can I get a check on that?
Yep, looks good, great.
All right, good. So what are you looking at here? So you're looking at a page that we have in development now. So this is not something you could use quite yet. This is work in development. We're adding an application to Salesforce. You've seen a little bit about this in earlier conferences, and we really meant it. So we're building this thing. And one of the things that it does is it uses that CMIS API that Peter described. So you've got this console page that shows up in Salesforce where you could take a Salesforce organization and you could associate it with a site in Alfresco. So if I look at that, I see these are some sites. Well, how is it getting that site list? It's getting it by looking at the sites collection in CMIS that Peter mentioned to you. So I've already saved that away, and I've already saved that association away, and I could create files now using this application in Salesforce that are associated with Salesforce objects. So for example, I have a hypothetical town of Springfield. Maybe it needs some repairs to the nuclear plant or something there. I can associate files in Alfresco now with this opportunity in Salesforce. So you're looking at these files, and I can attach a file from my desktop now, and I could attach a file. I'll just attach this interesting picture here. I'll call it a photo, and I'll save it away. Now this is a very quick demo of the application, but the important thing in the context of this presentation is that if you look at what's happening behind the scenes using a tool that allows you to look at the requests, you could see that there are CMIS post operations that are happening behind the scenes that are actually accomplishing the upload of these documents. These are CMIS operations that are happening behind the scenes that are actually putting those files into Alfresco from Salesforce. So it's an example of files, in this case coming from my Mac system here, being published from Salesforce to Alfresco. And Peter mentioned OAuth 2, and that's an important detail here too, because you might wonder how authentication is being done here. How am I able to post files to a system like Alfresco that requires authentication? Well, we do that by having OAuth tokens that the user opts into. And when they do that, they're granting permission to Salesforce to act on their behalf, but it's Alfresco that's done the authentication. So now if I look in my Alfresco site and I look inside of this site, I could see my documents now that have been updated. There's the control forensics application. So this is a site that's in our cloud now that's been updated by a Salesforce application using our public API. So that's kind of interesting. What else can you do? There's just a picture of the forensic scene. I don't know what that's about. Just sort of pick that at random. What else can you do with this? We have other applications. We have mobile applications that are using the API as well. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm going to start up a proxy. The reason I'm going to start up this proxy is I want to illustrate some of the API flows. So here's an emulator I have running. And in my emulator, I could jump into a site, and the emulator is now, as you could see in the Charles proxy I have running here, it's actually going off and updating a token. So I've done that. It's gotten a list of sites. So you can see it issuing the site's membership request. Let's look a little bit about what that looks like. So I can look at the request, I can look at the response. And the response is that JSON response that Peter was explaining. If I look at it in a structured form, look at this here. Look at it in a structured form, I could actually see there are my 5 sites. There's the engineering site. If I look down here, I think I'll see the Tech Talk site. There it is. So this is an illustration of, in this case, it's an Android application that I'm running in an emulator that's talking to my Alfresco site using the public API. Now, one of the other things that this Android application has the ability to do is to query favorites. So in this case, you could see it actually issuing requests to get favorites, and I can designate new favorites and so on. I'll actually be illustrating the use of the favorites and site membership request API with a different application here in a minute. But you can see the power that the API provides to an application like this one on Android that needs to get content from Alfresco. So what else can you do? So I took a little bit of time over this past weekend to write some examples that illustrate more about the API. These are some custom examples I've written that are Chrome extensions. So if you look at these, this is my Eclipse environment, and I won't go into a lot of detail about this, but you can see, I'll just take the favorites one here. So look at the favorites one here. What this does is it gets a list of sites, and you can see the request it's making here looks like this. I can get the person's profile information, so you can see the profile information looking like that. When I get a list of sites, I could then go through the favorites list of those, or the site's membership request list of those sites. This is site membership request 1. Sorry. I could then request membership when I need to. So if I find I don't have a role in that site, I could request membership, or I could just leave it alone. So now at this time I actually will look at the site's favorites one. So you can see this is the example. Oh, this is it. So if I go down to here, I can get the sites from Alfresco. There it is. I can go and I can get the person information again. If I want to designate something as a favorite, I can look to see whether it's already a favorite, and if it's not, I can make it a favorite. So let's look at what one of these looks like when it's running in real life, not just looking at some code in Eclipse. So let me just put this to the fore here. So I'll go to my my favorites list. So I go to here, and there's my favorites list. So you look at behind the scenes, again using Charles, you can see I'm getting my favorites. I'm getting my favorites list here. Or I'm getting my favorites. Here it is, and you can see the use of the where predicate. So you can see where exists target site. If I look at the responses, I get back an array of 3 objects. So these are my current favorites, created at, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I have current favorites. So if I wanted to, I could go back to this list, update it here, and I could say, you know, I want to make marketing a favorite. So this is a site that Peter owns. So I'll just say that's a favorite now. So you could see the post request happening. So it's a post request going to, there it is, and marketing is now a favorite of mine. So I could do the same with product management. I could decide to make something that was a favorite before no longer a favorite. I could say, you know, I don't really like this marketing guy, so I'm going to remove that favorite. And that's looking at this behind the scenes, you could see the delete requests going out. So you could see the response on the delete request is a 204, no content. So you can see how easy it is to develop an application that runs, in this case, in a Chrome extension that uses those get, put, post, deletes to accomplish a set of tasks. I could do similarly.
Hey, Greg. Greg,
Yep.
Before you move on, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Sorry if I missed it, but when would you have a site favorite come back where that target site wasn't present in the JSON? Like, why was that where clause needed there? I don't think I think I'm confused about what you're.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So you don't need to use the where clause. It's an optional thing. If you don't use the where clause, you'll get back all your favorites. So if I just say I want to get a list of Jeff Potts favorites, then I'll get back your files, your folders, your sites, whatever favorites. And that's fine.
Okay.
In this case, for my Chrome extension, I was only interested in getting back the site favorites.
The sites, yeah, okay. I had totally missed that favorites was any kind of favorite, not just sites. So now
yeah,
I'm totally clued in now. Thank you.
That's a good question. So that's an example where we're using this concept of filter and results sets using a SQL-like predicate, but we want to make it very easy. And if you don't include it, you get everything, but it's a way of targeting only certain kinds of information. Now, this was a pretty simple extension that I had here, so I wasn't looking to do more than just site favoriting, but if I wanted to do file and folder favoriting, I would relax that where clause and do more of that.
Yeah,
so
cool, makes sense.
So so if I go back to my site dashboard here, so if you look at just a quick sojourn back to here, this is probably an important thing too. If I go back to my list, I see I have Tech Talk, Robots, Product Management, and Engineering. If I go back to my site dashboard here and share, and I look at my dashboard, I can look at my favorites now, and there they are. If I wanted to designate a new favorite, running a little slow here, my proxy. There it is, finally. Oh. So you get to see another feature of our OAuth here. So let me just explain what I've got going on here. Actually, this is a good illustration. We have an OAuth token we use to control access to these sites, and I'll illustrate how we can get one of those tokens. This is an example application that was built by Gethin James. I think he's actually on the call. And oops, the cloud is under heavy load, so I'm not sure that's going to work right now. But let's start again. Let's start this here. Well, I might not be able to do that part.
It's all the Tech Talk Live people coding along as you're talking, right?
Yeah. So so I'll start again here. Let's try it one more time, and then I'll get it. So we're getting a lot of people hitting the cloud right now. So I'm going to authorize this, and I'll submit this. Now this token right here is actually used by my applications. So if you go into my my Eclipse environment here, for example, I have this right here. I could just paste that in there, update it. Similarly, I could paste it in here, update it. And now you'll get to see my fancy development environment here. All I need to do is reload my extension, and they're up to date. So I can go back into my favorites list now. I could say, I want to make marketing a favorite. So I can make it a favorite. can go over to marketing now. I can refresh this page. And I should see this in a second. Yeah, try it. See if the post is actually happening here. There it is. There's the post. And I have a similar capability here now. So there it is. So I can, a similar capability with site membership requests. So I've color-coded this a little bit here. So I have green sites or sites in which I have a role that are public. These are sites in which I have a role that are moderated. And these are sites I'm not a member of yet. So I can do a request here. And if I do a request to join that site, you can see the request happening behind the scenes. And if I look at the request here, look at the response, you can see that seems to be fine. So I can now go into my cloud environment here, and this time I'll log out and I'll pretend to be Peter Monks, who actually owns that site.
How did you get my password?
It's mullet for everyone out there. So I can see now, I can go to my tasks. And there it is. There's my request to join the marketing site. So I could say, you know what, I'll approve this guy, Greg. Now if I go back to my lists of, if I go and get my marketing thing now, I now have a role. I've been made a site consumer by Peter. All done with input, post, and delete.
And an interesting thing just to note about that is that effectively the browser right now has two separate clients in talking to Alfresco. There's the browser itself that is logged in as me, that's using the share user interface, and then there's Greg's extension thing that appears in the Chrome toolbar that's using OAuth to talk to the APIs, and it's logged in as Greg. So just in case it was a little confusing, there's actually two different authentication contexts visible there right now. And Greg, when you have a chance, if you have a chance, and I know we're getting a little tight on time, but there was actually a request from the audience to show an attempt to request site membership for a private site. I don't know if you've got a private site that you can do that, but it's interesting just seeing the 404.
That's actually interesting because the way I've done this is because I'm getting a list of sites, I don't have in that list private sites. We filter them out. So you don't have that. What I would have to do is actually get a private site and poke it in using a RESTful client like WizClient or something like that, because we actually filter out that list here.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. But if I did try to do that,
I mean, basically, if you created a private site as Peter right now, and then you told yourself what that ID would be, right, and then you tried to request membership to that ID, which is private, which you normally wouldn't know, then you're just going to get a 404 back.
Yeah, you know what? We'll give this a quick try here because so let's just jump into Eclipse here, because what I can do is I can kludge it up a little bit here. I could go to my my site membership requesting here.
And actually, Jeff, just while Greg sets that up, Jeff, that description is exactly spot on. And furthermore, if the site ID was invalid, meaning there is no site ID, the response would be indistinguishable. And that's
right,
the probing back issue that Greg mentioned earlier, is we don't want to leak information about even the existence of private sites. So there's actually no way for a client app to tell the difference between a request to join a site that doesn't exist and a request to join a site that's private. Those two are completely indistinguishable from one another to a client app.
So there is a private site that Peter has here, which is finance. So what I'll do is I'm just going to stick that. If I do this correctly. Obviously, I'm hard coding this now, so this will not work. In the general case, but maybe we'll be able to see the actual post request going out to the finance and getting back to 404. So now whenever I request membership in this, it'll actually try to request membership to the finance site. So now I'll go back to my my fancy development environment again. I'll reload them both. I'll go to here. And it doesn't matter which one I pick here now, right? Whoops, I do have to pick one that I'm going to get the request membership on. So there it is. And you guess what? You get a 404 back. See? So
cool.
We're playing dumb here. Even though finance does exist, we're going to pretend it doesn't. We're going to get back, sorry, we don't know what you're talking about. So that's an illustration of that.
So Sujay, hopefully that answers your question, but if it doesn't, please post a follow-up into the Q&A chat.
Okay, so I requested membership of a site I'm not allowed to see, and I forced forced the request, and I could have done that through a real HTTP client, but interest of time, I just kludged up my app to illustrate that, but hopefully that made it clear. I have one more demo here. I know we're going to run a little bit long. That's okay, hopefully. I have one more demo here, which is our nifty iOS app. So I don't need Charles anymore here. So I'm going to get rid of Charles because he can get in the way sometimes. I love Charles, but you don't need him, you don't need him. So here I have an iOS application that is also using our public API. In this case, it's going to the site sort of list. It's getting back the member requests from the Public Works contract. And it's using the API to do that. So hopefully we'll get that list. Sometimes it won't cooperate with me, but you saw it there a minute ago, so it's taking a while, but I don't want to hold it up too long. But the list of folders, the list of sites, everything I'm seeing here is actually being derived using our public API, using the combination of the CMIS and public APIs that we've described. And the really nice thing about this is that, I'll just back up to here a little bit, is that we've published an API reference that allows you to do everything that we're doing in our iOS app or our Android app yourself. And we've provided a level of abstraction here so that if you're working in iOS or Android, we've made it a little bit simpler by providing these simple classes like the document class here that handles some of the API details for you. So if you're looking to build your own mobile application, we love that idea. And you can do that by using our mobile client, our mobile SDK to make that possible. And I think with that, Peter, what I'm going to do now is transfer control back to you, and you can fill in the participants on where we're going next with our APIs.
Great, thanks, Greg. Yeah, and just to clarify, what Greg was showing very quickly at the end there were what we're referring to as client SDKs. So it's all good and well to have a very approachable, very easy to use series of REST APIs, but we want to make it even easier than that and give client app developers idiomatic, basically idiomatic language native SDKs for our APIs as well. And we've already done that for iOS and Android, and in fact, Jared Otley has also put one together for Java that uses Spring Social. So there's a Java, if you're a Java developer or develop for the JVM, you can use Spring Social Alfresco and it will connect to these same APIs. And the intention is certainly to grow on that and to build on that. And of course, if you're using CMIS, then you already get a bunch of native language clients as well, because also has the same concept. So we just saw a demo, and very quickly I'm going to jump into a quick section on roadmap. This is looking ahead, usual sort of safe harbor statement disclaimers apply. This is, at this point, the plan, but plans may change based on shifting priorities and etc. So, you know, until it comes out, pretend it doesn't exist, but at the same time, know that these are things that right now are looking pretty solid. So, in fact, work is already underway on this first item. We are moving or merging these APIs from cloud into Alfresco Enterprise 4.2. So these REST APIs will be available in Enterprise 4.2, and you'll be able to write client apps that connect to either the Alfresco Cloud or the Alfresco Enterprise instance, and you'll have the same set of REST APIs or close to it. To point out, we are developing APIs for cloud first. So as we add new entity types, and you'll recall we can do that without breaking backwards compatibility, et cetera, but as we add new entity types, those will appear in cloud first, and then they will be rolled out or merged back into Enterprise Edition. So we're not, at this stage, we're not planning on doing kind of rolling releases of APIs for Enterprise. That just puts customers through too much of an upgrade churn. But we will be doing that in cloud, and so new APIs will appear fairly frequently in cloud, and then in chunks for Enterprise. And we'll just piggyback along for the ride on other Enterprise releases. So that work is underway. We're also looking at some new API types. So these are the names that I mentioned, and currently we have Alfresco and CMIS. The two that we're looking at adding right now are user provisioning and workflow. And the workflow API is being done by the activity team, so Tice and Yoram and those guys. And that will be a set of workflow-centric entity types and set of resources, etc., that let you view and control, basically view and control workflow. At this stage, it's not 100% defined the exact rollout plan. It's possible that initially it will focus on task management. That's what our mobile app needs fairly quickly. And then later on we'll extend to include things like being able to programmatically update workflow definitions. That's kind of the thin end of the wedge. That's not a common use case, but the intention is certainly to support it. It's more just a question of when. User provisioning is an interesting one because we've had requests from a number of customers to implement a standard called SCIM. I actually can't remember what it stands for. I don't know if Greg, you recall, but SCIM is a standard that's out there, and it's supported by a number of identity management vendors. So this is all about being able to quickly and rapidly provision a large number of user accounts into an Alfresco instance. And as I say, as Greg mentioned, we're not looking to reinvent wheels if we can avoid it. Instead, we're looking to leverage standards and existing conventions, and SCIM looks like a good standard for that. So those will show up as two new API names. There will be Alfresco, CMIS, which are already there, and there may very well be a user or SCIM, or name is TBD, but basically a set of user provisioning entity types, and then a workflow set of entity types as well.
And just to add to that, Peter, that's the system for cross-domain identity management. They wanted to call it cross-domain user management, but for obvious reasons, they didn't like that acronym, so they went for identity management.
I don't know. It sounds pretty good to me. Yeah, I can see why they would have avoided that. We're also looking at some new API versions. So CMIS 1.1 is the obvious looming new API version that's coming along, and that's basically out of our control. That's defined by Oasis. That standard, or that version of the standard, is in the final stages of ratification. It's actually with Oasis. There is a proposed standard now sitting with Oasis. And like I said, that's probably within 3, perhaps on the outside 6 months of ratification. And we do intend to support that rapidly after it gets ratified. And again, that will happen first in cloud. The second thing we're looking at is there are some things that we did in the V1 APIs that in hindsight weren't the best possible way to do them. And so Greg and I are sort of chatting at the moment about when and where we pull the trigger on a V2 API. And before everyone sort of gets alarmed, keep in mind that the rollout of a V2 API does not in any way imply that V1 of the APIs will go away. In fact, they will remain in place for some period of time. We actually have basically a deprecation and end-of-lifing policy for API versions that means they do stick around with potentially multiple concurrent versions in existence at a point in time. So certainly when V2 comes out, V1 will still be there, will still work the same way. Client apps that use it will continue to function correctly. It's just that new applications will probably, and we would encourage them to start with V2 instead. So that's coming. And I should mention the version numbers for the REST side of the house are backwards compatibility breaking. They break backwards compatibility in some way, and that's why we're forced to roll a new version. So generally we don't roll new versions unless we know we have to break backwards compatibility. There are some things we'd like to change that do in fact do that. And of course within the Alfresco API we're looking at some new entity types. So renditions, transformations, basically ways to trigger transformation on the server between MIME types. And we would probably represent this via some kind of entity type called renditions. It would be possibly a sub-collection of a node that still needs a bit more design and thought around how exactly we express it. But keep in mind we're sticking to resource types, not RPCs. So this is not going to be an RPC mechanism. That's something that we've had requested. Mobile clients benefit from it. We have some technology partners who would like to see us. So that's likely the next cab up the rank. And then another one that's actually related to user provisioning and onboarding of new cloud customers is bulk imports. So the ability to submit a large amount of content programmatically and have that content imported into the system. That one's a bit more speculative only because for really large bulk imports, they're usually you need to do tricks to make it performant. And most of those tricks basically revolve around avoiding network I/O. So clearly with a REST API, an HTTP-based API, network I/O is part and parcel of the mechanism. As a result, it may be that we need to look at bulk import slightly differently and it ends up not being a new entity type. But again, that's a TBD. It's certainly something we're looking at. In fact, Gessen right now is in the process of adding support for what we're calling binary properties. So right now our JSON documents, and we saw examples of these JSON documents through the demo and earlier in the slide deck, but we have a number of JSON, beyond the JSON data types, we have a number of additional data types that we've defined. Things like date time, and has particularly poor support for primitive data types. It actually irks me to no end that JSON is so popular and yet so kind of brain dead in such a fundamental way. So we've defined conventions for additional data types, URLs, date times, I think enumerated values or enumerated lists. Some of the work that's also going on right now, as I mentioned, Gessen's in the middle of this, is adding support for what we're referring to as binary properties, which is a JSON document that has a property that happens to be a binary blob. Obviously, Alfresco repository has first-class support for that. It's a very native, very natural thing to do in Alfresco. HTTP is a lot more difficult to deal with that way, and clearly JSON doesn't do binary really at all. So we're coming up with we have come up with a design that supports this and then exposes it out via a certain set of HTTP mechanisms. We didn't really touch on this in the demo, but we also are adding support for select, and this is similar to SQL select, but not identical, and it's one thing I think may trip people up initially. Select in SQL is purely a projection mechanism that lets you reduce the amount of data that you receive back. If a response has in SQL terms, 6 columns, in REST terms, 6 JSON properties, and you only want 2 of them, SQL select lets you trim down and get just the 2 columns that you need. We're looking to do the same thing. From a JSON perspective, if your client only wants 1 or 2 of the JSON properties that a particular response offers, we want to give you the flexibility to just retrieve those. And that's important, particularly from a mobile perspective, because mobile clients pay a heavy price for bandwidth. In particular, it drains battery fairly quickly, so we want to let client applications trim down the result set and reduce the amount of data that they're transmitting over the network. Transclusion is the new concept here, and this doesn't really have a direct equivalent in SQL. Probably outer join is the nearest concept. This is the idea that if a particular entity has a sub-collection, and we saw earlier that we now have favorites. For example, a person object has a subset, a sub-collection of favorites. There are cases where you want to retrieve the parent person object in its entirety and include, and the rest term or the hypermedia term is transclude, the sub-collection of favorites as well. So what we've realized after a lot of kind of fairly detailed investigation, we've realized this is really just the same thing, or it's really the mirror image of projection. Projection is limiting what you get by default, from the default. Transclusion is increasing what you get from the default. And so we're looking at starting to implement some of that design that we've come up with. And again, the whole goal is to allow client application developers to pick the shape of the data that they receive back. We don't want to simply be in the business of saying, if you want to get a person and their favorites, you're going to have to make at least 2 HTTP calls. Again, for certain clients, and the mobile is the canonical example here, that's really bad news from a battery perspective, latency perspective, in some cases cost to the end user perspective if they're paying for their bandwidth. So we want to offer the ability for the client app developer to basically define the shape of the data that they want back and then ask the server in one request to get precisely what they want. Greg, I think, has coined the term an amoeba. We have a data structure and we want to let client applications draw like a blobby line around them through that object graph and get back the amoeba that they precisely need. And that's what Select is for. It's going to give client apps the ability to really tightly control what it is they receive back. So some of that work will happen and is on the roadmap. We did see an example of this. You saw the where exists site to limit favorites to just site favorites, not folder or file favorites. That's really the very first baby step towards a much more comprehensive restriction or where clause support. So we want to offer the ability for client developers to not only say, give me the favorites that target a site, we want them to be able to say, give me the people whose surname is Monks, let's say, or whose favorite hairstyle is mullet. And those are all queries that we can support, and the way we intend to do that is by beefing up the number of conditions and operators that our where predicate supports. So that's all been designed. Again, the exists that will come out in the favorites API in the next couple of days is really just a baby step, but the idea is that it is part of a bigger vision for this, and that there will be more comprehensive support for arbitrary restrictions. And again, this all comes back, you probably see the theme here, we want to give client applications control over getting exactly the data they want. We're not going to get it precisely, we're not going to be exact, but we will try to make it as close as possible so that a client app can really be precise and prescriptive in defining what it is they want, both the data in each row as well as the number of rows and the predicates that those rows must meet. And then finally, discoverability improvements. Right now we do have some limited discoverability. It is possible to do some form of self-discovery of the APIs from an API client. We really need to beef that up. And in fact, the primary driver for this, although it's potentially useful for client apps, the real driver here is actually documentation. The current REST API documentation, those of you who've looked at it, is a PDF file, and we'll, I think, shortly be making that available as a set of HTML pages as well. To my mind, that is really very much a first baby step. It's just a lowest common denominator approach. If you look at a lot of the more sophisticated, particularly cloud API vendors that are out there. What they offer are in-browser execution consoles where you can see the doc, you can see the API, you can see the parameters and the JSON response that you will get back. And then right then and there in the browser, you can actually hit a go button and watch the API being exercised in real time. That's our goal as well. We've actually already started looking at some technologies. Again, Geffen has been looking at a number of these tools. And discoverability is, in fact, the way to make that work. If we can self-describe or have our APIs self-describe, then some of these execution console tools become a lot easier for us to simply install, configure, and then expose to our developer community. So that's basically it. You can, of course, try this all for yourself. You can register for a developer key at alfresco.com/develop. That's completely free. We have no intention to charge for access to our cloud for the developers. We want developers to go forth and prosper and multiply and develop wonderful apps. And then finally, there's also a link to the documentation, and this covers the REST documentation specifically, but from the developer site, you can also get access to the mobile SDK documentation if that's what you're interested in. And then questions. And I did see one question earlier from, I think Richard asked the question, and I'll just pop up the question. It was, I think, how long can an OAuth token be refreshed for before the user needs to log in again? Yeah, how many times can your client refresh the OAuth token without the user needing to log in? So this is a question about OAuth handling. And the way OAuth works is there are basically two tokens that your application needs to hold on to. One of them is called the access token, and this is the token that is actually used in API calls. When you call an API, you must pass the access token in an HTTP header, and that's what we use to figure out who the user is, who the application is, and therefore what they have access to. So that's the thing that is used. That has a validity of 1 hour. So every hour on the hour, or an hour after that is issued, that access token becomes non-functional and ceases to operate. That's where the refresh token, the second of the two tokens, comes in. And the refresh token, as the name implies, is used to refresh the access token. And that's its only purpose. It can't be used for API calls. It doesn't have any other purpose but to let your app automatically request a new access token. And so on the hour, your access token has expired, no longer valid. If you try to make a call, you'll get a 401 response code. That's the point at which your client can automatically, without any user involvement whatsoever, make a second call using the refresh token and say, give me a new access token. At that point, you get a new access token, and you can use that new access token to retry your API call and for any subsequent API calls. And that API token, that new access token, lasts for another hour. So the question isn't really how long do the access tokens expire for, because you can refresh those for free. There's no user involvement required. You just refresh on the hour every hour, and the user never even knows that that's happening. So the real question is, do the refresh tokens expire, and if so, what's the period for those? And as Greg mentioned earlier, we've actually just increased that. It is now 28 days. So the refresh token will cease to operate after 28 days. And after 28 days, you will in fact need to prompt the user again to re-authenticate. So every 28 days, at worst, assuming you've written your application properly and you're handling the refresh flow correctly, users will only need to log in once every 28 days.
An illustration of that refresh is what the Salesforce application does. So you'll notice I didn't need to authenticate there. And the reason I didn't need to is I had authenticated earlier, and as Peter mentioned, the refresh token was used to refresh my OAuth token. An example of where I hadn't done that is in my Chrome extension, where I have a variable that was holding the access token, and I had to go manually refresh that myself in order to sort of poke it in the code. But What a real application would do is actually go and refresh the OAuth token using the refresh token, as Peter mentioned in that example.
All right, guys, I got to cut this off. I mean, we're 20 minutes over, so I think your DevCon presentation actually does a great job of walking through the OAuth handshake and how refresh tokens work and stuff like that. So if people have more questions, they should read that. And also, obviously, any of us can be reached directly or in the forum. So there's an Alfresco API forum at forums.alfresco.com, and I monitor that forum, as does Greg and Peter. So please ask your questions in the forums for the benefit of the entire community. Thank you for your time today, Greg and Peter. This was awesome. So it was a lot of good information. For all the folks that hung in there towards the bitter end, thank you for doing that. And we will send out the links to the presentation and to the session recording. In May, first Wednesday of May, we'll be doing a talk on Alfresco and reporting. So that's a common request, is to be able to do reporting against Alfresco data. So we will see how one of our community members, Chiarda Peelan, has addressed that, and we'll be discussing that. So see you guys again in May, and until then, I'll see you around the community. Thanks.